Well, greetings everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Inworld Review. Now, if you are by any chance watching this live, you probably won't be with us for a couple of minutes yet. You just got the message. But I'd like to assure everybody that no, the clocks did not go back this week. We went back, so to speak. We're an hour late, as good as. A few technical hitches and, bouncing avatars and changing animations, all sorts of technical things went funny here today. So we are with you a little bit late, but better late than never. And it's probably not going to be a 3-hour show today anyway. So we're okay to go, I think. Right. For those of you who are new to the show and just started watching, this is an open-ended talk show, really, where we talk about matters pertaining to the hypergrid. The connected virtual world platforms that they run on something called Open Simulator, and hypergrid connectivity is an optional part of that simulator. And coming up, we announced it previously, in December this year, 9th and 10th, it will be the 5th Open Sim Community Conference. And various things are in the works on that front at the moment. The call for proposals, in fact, went out this week, and it's sort of time to build up to the start of that conference. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce who's with us here today. Firstly, we have, as always, James Outloud, who's multitasking on our camera desk. Welcome, James.
Well, thank you, Mal. It's good to be here.
And we're joined with an old familiar face. She hasn't been with us for quite a while, but she's known in world as Rhiannon Chatois, although I always call her Joyce Bettencourt, so be prepared. She is, of course, behind the grid, amongst others, behind the grid called Avacon, the Avacon Grid. She's runs Non-Profit Commons, sort of Friday meets in a place called SL. Second Life, I believe, is the longer version of that name, or Lindenville it was called once. It's a walled garden, but never mind, it's a place. And she is, I guess, our sort of lead team person on the organising committee for the aforementioned Open Sim Community Convention. So welcome, Joyce.
Thanks, Mel, and great to be here.
Right. Your voice suddenly sounded a bit tinny there. I don't know whether... Oh, that's better. Maybe
just
it's just
moving the mic, maybe.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Wonderful.
Yep, that helped.
And we're also joined with somebody else who's becoming quite a regular on this show. Often, sometimes even behind the cameras when James is away. But he's here today as part of Avacon and the OSCC thing. So it's a re-welcome, so to speak, to Marcus Llewellyn. Welcome, Marcus.
Hey, thank you, and hello, everybody.
So, welcome everybody, and down to business. An hour late, of course. They say that half of making movies and television is hanging around in dressing rooms waiting to be called. But there is also the aspect of this as by the time you get called, can you remember your script? Can you remember what you're thinking? I'm feeling rather disorientated at the moment because I was ready to go and didn't go, so to speak. Anyway, we know what we're here for. We're basically here to talk about some general things. I have got, you will see behind us on the set here, we've got a couple of the, a nice 3D placard built for Open Simulator. It's their standard logo, but it's a 3D version. So it's got a bit more depth to it than our slideshow. Also on the slide screens, I should say. We have a picture of the Open Sim Community Conference last year. Just to show you now and again while we're chatting. Before I do anything else, it's very much the event season. It seems to me in real life, all the conferences over here in Britain always seem to happen in sort of September, October, November period anyway. And in the virtual world, rather similar. Next weekend, I believe it is. I'll have to check. Well, it's pretty easy to check because we've actually got a sign here up It's the 23rd of September. Yeah, so it's literally starting next weekend. There's an event called Avatar Fest, which isn't so much a conference as an expo of people doing stuff creatively on the hypergrid, and they sort of can apply for pictures and things and take booths at the Avatar Fest and display their wares or promote their environments, etc., etc. Unfortunately, we did have them on the show a month or two ago back. I guess they're all rather busy putting it together because I haven't got anybody from Avatar Fest to actually join us today. But be warned, is coming at this time next week. It will be in full flow. So put that in your diary if you haven't already. Moving forward, as I said, we've got the Open Sim Community Conference coming up on December 9th and 10th this year. And will be a good idea to put that in your diary too. But there's a fair bit to talk about on this front. For example, being the early days of the organisation, the appeal, not only the proposals appeal going out, but also appeal for volunteers and for the various different things that happen at that event and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand the mic, so to speak, over to you, Joyce, so you can do a sort of rolling pitch, I think.
Sure. Oops.
And closer to the microphone as well.
There we go. Okay, and I actually kind of toggled my Inworld voice by accident too. I'm so used to that. So yes, obviously the Open Simulator Community Conference, as you mentioned, is coming up, and that's December 9th and 10th. And as you kind of put across, that it's the annual conference that focuses on the open simulator technology and really bringing together like the developer and user communities together. Back before we first started them, Avacon started the discussion with Overt Foundation at the time, which was the org that was behind the core developers of Open Simulator. And the core developers of Open Simulator, of course, are still around, but as a foundation, they're not in that way. But we started that conversation about how to bring together and get those conversations and sort of highlight what was great about the platform and sort of bring the community together around what Open Simulator, the software is, and what people are doing with it. So the conference continues on, and as you said, it's in its 5th year. It is purely a virtual conference, so there's no getting on a plane or any of that. We've had some pretty good keynotes through the years that are pretty high profile. Some of them have other virtual environments that folks would be familiar with. As you mentioned, Second Life. Of course, one year we had Philip Rosedale keynote, who's now High Fidelity. And then the core developers. We've had other people from kind of the broader internet and.
We had Adam from Science Space last year.
Yep, Adam from Science Space. Yeah. And then even Grady Bush, who's kind of broader internet fame beyond just virtual environments. So it continues on kind of in that vein. It takes place over those 2 days, and we've kind of changed up the flow of things as we've evolved through the years. And for the most part now, the last couple of years, it's been a single thread of content. I've really felt that, and I'm sure you guys can chat to that more too. More especially because all of you here beside me have like helped and streamed and kind of been involved in the content, but we felt that a single stream really kind of was a better format than folks having to make decisions and not being able to and sort of splitting up the community, and this way there's kind of a good intermix of, it's not just about just the coding, technical base of things. It's not just about the educational aspects of things. There's sort of the social pieces thrown in too, and some of the, the theatrical and other kind of things that make up kind of the, broader Open Simulator, what people do with it, and how it's put together and organize. So,
yes, I mean, pardon me, croaking here. It does mean you can sort of sleep through things you don't want to watch, but not actually have to risk the fact that you've got to make a choice about two events at once, you know. So it's a sort of a single strand is nice, and I think it enables people coming, you know, to absorb a greater worldview, as it were, of what's going on. And they probably would if they were following tracks, you know, because an educator might pop along and they go to all the educator gigs, you know, and then they'll find something else in between. Whereas if there is no educated gig, they you know, then they're free to sit in on things that will enhance their own education as to what's going on, you know. So I think that works very well. And as you said, it's I've suddenly realised, of course, all four of us sitting here are actually part of this organisational group. So forgive us, folks, if we sound like it's a picture. It's a sponsored show. That is pure coincidence, and it's all voluntary, I hasten to add. So it's not as though we're being paid to tell you anything. I think the single strand worked quite well, and of course. You know, the way we handle broadcasting and stuff has changed over time too. Marcus, for example, we last year we actually did our normal live stream of a sequence, but you decided to initiate all the streaming volunteers, for example, running via your mixer, in fact, your ingest server, to a master stream on YouTube. And that was a kind of innovation, wasn't it, really? Because before that, it was a matter of sort of clicking, going live with one thing or another. And the only time it had a problem was with our Hypergrowth Safari, because unlike live stream, YouTube does have something of a lag between real time and what goes out. And I remember we were sitting there during Hypergrowth Safari last year, and sort of with Pathfinder and George Egworth, and we were running a commentary, you know. So say, well, as you can see, the tour is now heading off into the mountains, and somebody would then go into the back channel and say, no, we arrived in the mountains 5 minutes ago. So, you know, real-time commentary was a problem. But in other respects, did you feel the sort of the idea of everything going into the ingest server, which is what we'll probably do this year, and going out to YouTube was an enhancement, Marcus?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was and will be still. Yeah, I mean, when I joined in 2014 and when we streamed in 2015 as well, it was a case of each individual streamer had to connect to the outgoing service. And I believe in both of those 2 years we were using Ustream. And so that meant that the stream would stop and then it would start for each presentation. And I wanted something that felt a bit more like, you know, an actual continuous live television station kind of thing. So yeah, that's when I came up with the idea, and I was, you know, I tinkered with it myself before, you know, coming to the organizational committee with it, because at that time I was still just a volunteer. And I was a little bit nervous about speaking up. I'm a shy kind of guy. And
never, don't believe it.
Oh, oh yes, I am. But yeah, and it worked. It worked even better than I thought, with the exception, and you're absolutely right, we definitely learned a thing or two when it came to trying to coordinate multiple streamers out for a single presentation, which is, you know, which is what the HG Safari came down to. But for normal presentations and panels and things like that, it worked perfectly. So yeah, that's definitely a methodology I want to stick with. Plus, you know, it was nice to have, you know, people had, you know, it wasn't a lot of content, but people at least had something to watch between presentations. They knew that the stream was still live. They could see who our sponsors got lots of promotion. You know, we had the whole Open Simulator Community Conference promotional video. There was, I think I also ran Nebadan Azumi, Michael Circone's visualization of the Open Simulator code.
Yeah.
That was good.
And then what I really liked was they had all these little up next films. It's saying who's coming up next and at what time, and what they're going to be presenting on. So yeah, I mean, it felt, I think it felt a lot more like an actual television station type feed, and I hoping that this year it will be as good, if not better.
Yep, that's the idea, is to improve on what went before, I think. So yes, people will be able to obviously patch into YouTube over the weekend and really watch the whole proceedings. But this is a virtual world concert, a conference, and it it's about virtual worlds, and it is a virtual event, and there is probably nothing better than actually being there on the spot. Now, in due course, Joyce, I forget how we work this now. I know once upon a time you had to register to attend, no cost, but register. Do we still do that, or is it pretty much allow for people to just type a grid in?
There still is. I mean, there still is registration, and where it is its own self-supporting grid in and of itself, the conference grid, that allows folks who either are new to Open Simulator in general, which we do get, a certain percentage every year that are brand new users, or and maybe they have some background coming from, say, something like another virtual world, like Second Life or otherwise, but and sometimes they're just new in general. But so we registrations are useful for that, and also registrations, of course, are useful for anybody who's speaking and presenting and needs like a local avatar or certain permissions or things that they need to do. But that
can you move closer to that mic again?
Sure.
Oh, wonderful. That's
okay. My guess is I think Skype's probably picking up the wrong mic, but now I think I know what it's doing. So registration is still, we still encourage folks to register, and it also helps us kind of get a handle on some of those demographics of our, what are people doing in Open Simulator with Open Simulator. But that being said, the entire grid is open to hypergridding. We set up, the first year or two, there was a lot of kind of setting up the grid and sort of configuring things and testing those configurations to make sure that it could handle the load that we put upon it. Unlike, say, the majority of Open Simulator grids, we have on conference days suddenly, 100 people or plus, can log in all within a few minutes time. So when and so we kind of also when we portion off the traffic such that there are several landing regions. So if you have a local account, people get distributed between like 4 regions, and they kind of go on their way. If you hypergrid in, you kind of go into the hypergrid kind of region. And all of these regions are sort of almost like, you could think of them like lobbies in a hotel or something, or, you end up in the lobby first, and then from there, that helps kind of distribute the load of people coming in, and then they kind of can go on their way to the keynote regions or the expos or those kind of things. So it is open to hypergrid. I mean, of course, because there is that one lobby region, things, we haven't had an issue, but, that being said, if there were a lot of people trying to hit it hypergrid at once, it might be a bit slow. But people can hypergrid in directly, either to the landing regions, or they can come in right to any of the expo regions as well, directly without having to go to the landing regions. And then come see the keynotes and the presentations. Yeah.
Well, that, of course, is what I was going to say. I mean, however much you watch YouTube broadcast or whatever, not only is there nothing like being there on the spot, but of course what you don't see on TV is all these other things like at the expo areas, and I think this year there's going to be a sort of stage area, not the presentation stage, but a sort of staging area for some other things. These are things that for the most part people won't see on the broadcast because they're in the conference center, but they're not the main amphitheater, so to speak. So what kind of things will they be getting to see outside the presentation area, so to speak?
Yeah, so So as you said, yeah, we have 4 regions that make up that big keynote. So, we can hold a lot of avatars during the main 2-day content stuff. That's the presentations and the panels and speakers and keynotes and stuff. Outside of that, on the conference grid, we have 5 or 6, depending upon regions, that are the expo areas, and then and those make up. We open up we kind of have like almost like a crowdfunding Kickstarter approach to that, and that way that we allow anybody in the community for a smaller amount to have kind of their expo region, sort of similar you would to a regular conference venue, So, but the fact that it's a smaller amount, that anybody who has their own grid or their own project they want to show off, they can kind of get a spot in the expo region in that way. So you kind of can explore around all that, which is a kind of a sampling of all of various communities and projects around, the Open Simulator metaverse. And in addition to that, there are sort of some key pieces within those expo regions as well. We have set aside in Expo Region 3. There's a kind of just as you would in a physical conference, maybe have a poster area that a presenter would be presenting, and then there would be an additional place where they would be able to set up a 2D poster of highlights about their work. We have a 3D virtual world variant of that, where everybody kind of gets a little space in this that's in a quarter of one of the conference expo regions, and they can kind of set up their own little virtual poster space. I mean, they can create objects and have be as dynamic and as immersive as they want within their little spaces. So, people can explore kind of the additional content before and after somebody speaks in that area of the expos. And then there's also a whole other area in Expo 2 that's dedicated to kind of the hypergrid. And there's Ember, who I know has been on here before as a guest. Her and sort of the hypergrid Safari folks have set up a quarter of that region to kind of focus all around the hypergrid. So some of the resources on how to hypergrid, especially, like I said, there's a subset of some folks that are new to Open Simulator, and then there's probably a good portion of folks who have local accounts, who maybe have local accounts on other thing, but still aren't that familiar maybe with the hypergrid or still new to it. So it allows them there to kind of step through, learn what the hypergrid is, get all the resources, get lots of landmarks on places they can explore. And in prior years, we've also had sort of guided by hypergrid Safari folks, hypergrid tours.
Yeah, it's actually too early to be able to tell who the presenters are going to be this year. But I mean, I do know for a fact that Thursday and I will be hosting a panel which will endeavour to do that over and beyond the exhibit, to inform people about what the hypergrid is, a bit of history and examples of, just talking about the ability to literally transport yourself between worlds. So that is one thing we can actually announce already, because I know it's going to happen. I put my bloodied finger on the thing or whatever. I'm committed.
Certainly. I think, for those out there who may not be as familiar, I mean, the hypergrid, in essence, are the protocols that allow, like, as you said, folks to go from one grid to another grid. And I'm sure you guys have talked about it frequently, but if anybody's just watching
endlessly
first time, and in some ways, at least of my opinion, and I think some others, like, it's probably one of the top, 2 or 3 things that make Open Simulator special, and certainly make it be that idea that it can be that open platform for the open metaverse and be that 3D web, because people can hypergrid from one grid to another grid in the same way you can hop from one website to another website, just with your avatar and all your possessions. So that's definitely an important part of the grid and of the conference grid, and lots of resources and lots of both in the where people can find stuff once they learn how to hypergrid, and then that initial how to hypergrid and everything. Yep, you can go on from there. Sorry.
I was going to move on a bit.
Sure.
we mentioned earlier that it's a single strand event this year. It was last year. It's become that. So, you know, there's a running agenda of presentations and stuff. But of course, if somebody really is a bit bored by a presentation, that's the ideal place to sort of take time off to go to the expo regions, or in the breaks for that matter. But there is another side to this too that I noticed last year, and I'm sure we'll have it this year, and that is that despite the fact that it's a Saturday, Sunday, 2-day conference, there is a lot of attendance activity in maybe the week before and particularly the week after, with sort of workshops, outings, the inevitable after parties, of course.
Yes.
These are things that aren't really listed in the schedule for the conference, but they're things that are set up to run out of hours while the conference is on, and maybe as a prelude to the conference and after. So I presume we'll look forward to quite a bit of that this year too.
Yeah, and we actually do have on the conference site, which is conference.opensimulator.org, we do have a form where people can kind of, if they want to hold what we call them community events, but in essence, that again, if that magic of the hypergrid, right? If you have a hypergrid enabled grid or space within a hypergrid enabled grid, then you can and you want to host an event that would be a great companion before or after, as you were saying, that you could fill out the form and we will throw it on the schedule. So we did have, as you said, there are sort of usually like right after things close is the closing parties. But even leading up to before, we have a lot of folks who, some of the people who are, say, presenting on things will have kind of tours prior to sort of, and or afterwards to sort of get a chance for people to actually go and, say, check out the immersive project space itself. So and we really, and that's a thing that, on the back end of all of us organizing, as Mel and everybody knows, we've been talking on trying to push that even more, that, if somebody's coming to present, is there a way to draw people to the deeper, experience that might exist on another grid. So certainly, we have these community events, and anybody can host a community event around, obviously the only tough times are during the main presentation-y panel stuff, Yeah. But any other time around that, even if it's up to a couple weeks prior, a couple weeks or so later on, it doesn't really matter. We'll throw that all on the schedule. There's a form, and it's right, if you go to the site, it's kind of right under the get involved. You'll see a community event sign up form, and that'll end up that. Then once we put the schedule together, they'll end up in there, and that'll let others know that they're happening. So that's another way to, to kind of get folks involved. Go on.
Sorry, you can finish. I thought.
I was going to talk about the volunteer thing, but I'll
well, that's what I was moving to. You said get involved. Basically, there is an organising committee. It's independent of Avicon, but it organises this particular event, and Avicon's sort of an umbrella over that. And it's comprised of all volunteers. Aren't we good? James, me, Marcus. So we are all volunteers ourselves, so to speak. But one of the crucial things at this point in time is, a public appeal, as it were, part of the reason we're here, to look for actual additional volunteers, not necessarily to jump into the full organising committee, but to, would you like to, moderate? In other words, introduce a panelist as they're coming on. We tend to rely on looking for volunteers to do that. Would you like to be a kind of hostess, where you're a greeter, I think the other name is, where somebody, you may not be confident in volunteering for anything particular, but you'd be quite happy to hang around and say hello to people arriving and point them in the right direction. And I guess there's a whole host of things. And in fact, as Marcus will probably tell us, we're looking for streaming volunteers too. We have the broadcast network and the systems all set up, but that doesn't mean you don't need extra people to be on cameras.
Oh, we absolutely always need more streamers. Always, always, always. And the other thing I'd add is, I'm on the organizing committee this year for the first time, which is exciting. But I've been just a volunteer for the last 2 years, and I tell you what, I knew about Open Simulator 2013, and I wanted to volunteer, and I didn't. I was just worried, would I be able to handle it? Would I have the time? Is this going to be too hard? Is it going to be scary? And, I want to, if there's anybody out there who's thought about volunteering and hasn't, volunteer. I think you'll find it's a lot more fun than you thought. The organizing committee is very accommodating about your schedule. They will only have you, volunteer when it's convenient for you. You'll be helping the community and us out a great deal by volunteering, and trust me, there's a wonderful sense of satisfaction that comes with it.
Absolutely, and you meet people and get on with it. I'm tempted to say volunteers get a free ticket, but since everybody does, that's not going to help much. But
yeah,
but you're about to cut off, Joyce.
It's free for us all.
Yeah, we have the streamers, but we have all these other categories too, don't we, Joyce?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, kind of starting at those, probably the beginning role for anybody who isn't sure maybe where they might fit in, even wise, like as you said, greeters and audience folks. Like we definitely need a lot of those. And as I brought up before, right, we have those kind of lobby landing zones. Sometimes it's even like people will land there, and then where do they go from there? And then obviously once they get into the keynote regions, making sure they sit down and what's coming up next, and like people who are having issues maybe hearing things. So there's a lot of just like general kind of helping out.
And there's I know that because I've been one of them. There's a lot of people out there on every grid who love to just stand around that grid's landing zone and help new people out. And if you're that kind of person, you're absolutely perfect for as a volunteer for this conference.
Yeah. And then from there, of course, there's the we usually have need of some folks who are willing to build and script, so if you've got some skills in regards to that. I know the evolution of some of the things that come out of that, because we kind of have an ethos. Both Avicon as a base, right, has this ethos, and then Open Simulator and the conference combinedly, have the ethos of kind of this sharing angle. So, a lot of the things that come out of, say, being built or scripted, then they become tools that go out into the be able to be shared with the broader audience. Like case in point, some of the camera tools that are used even here on Inworld Review, like the camera HUD stuff, are things that evolved from tools that were initially developed for the Open Simulator conference. So, so there's that's a way to contribute if you're great at and want to kind of give your building or scripting help. There's always need for like new tools or updating things, new build things, that kind of stuff. And then.
Well, I was actually particularly thinking too. My memory is not actually that good, but people who might have in-world facilities for translation and feedback between presenters and audiences that maybe we haven't got already, that you would you'd be able to offer us. I mean.
Yes.
We do have some vague plans for a separate, but probably close enough to the conference event to showcase a bit of the international hypergrid, which isn't always English language, which often gets left out of these things. But at the same time, people do come to this conference because it is the only conference of its ilk from all over the world. in their virtual form, of course, which is easy. But, often there would be people who could really use a bit of help with translating what the speaker is saying and things like that. And I know there are a lot of people out there who are on their own grids or for their own needs are developing scripts and things that, could possibly be very useful. At the event. So, there's plenty of stuff around, but there's plenty to be found too. And in the case of that gamma HUD you mentioned, we've had a gamma HUD for donkey's years, but Marcus here took one James had done, but she rewrote it and made it 100 times better. So
I would say 100 times.
Well, yeah, but again with translators or whatever, you might have something that you use, and you're not sure if we got one already or something that's better, but just come forward, because we don't find out until we try it. So, you can actually be actively involved as not so much a volunteer bingo greeter or sitting down doing something, but in advance, contributing some of the tools that may just make a conference work better.
Yeah, no, those are fantastic points. And I think even there was the initial, there was Oswaldo, and I'm not going to remember, James will remember his last name, maybe.
Marcus just said it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, there, he was an initial volunteer, worked on that camera HUD, but the tools thing, that is important, I think. And as you said, like, it's something that, if you don't have to be in play during the conference, really. In that case, you can just come and enjoy the conference, but still contribute to help. Yes, translation tools would be great. More, as you said, more presenter type help things. If there's anybody out there who's an animator, we've not really usually done calls out for animators because there's sort of less of them, but, we've often dreamed of a more dynamic, way for like animation kind of system for the speakers who are on stage. It would be nice to not, to have more than just an avatar standing at a podium, certainly when we're filming, and then also, even in the speaker themselves would be, I think, more comfortable knowing that they weren't just a standstill thing. So, that's something that we've talked about, but has not come into our wheelhouse yet. So there's that, that ability to be able to, if you've got any of those sort of skills, to kind of lend them in that way. And
another one I just thought of, actually, I should really get it in, actually, is
sure.
It's a focus of the folks at the IMA, of course, but who have a background in disability access and things like that. But something that is very much sought after, not only, I guess, by OSCC, but also by the IMA at the moment, are looking at text-to-chat and chat-to-text translators, for example. These aren't language translators. They are facilities that would enable, for example, a hard of hearing person to actually be able to see a transcript of what's been spoken, or equally works the other way around. So somebody could actually type something in text and have it transmitted, on the region as voice. Now, all these are fairly convoluted, and sometimes they're just more of a hassle to implement than you want, but they're the kind of things on which the virtual world's future has been built, and so if any even things like that may seem a bit off center that could be useful to premiere at something like a conference like this, is it's more tools.
Yeah, and I mean, especially, yes, and like you said, any accessibility tools and stuff, but any of these things, I think, especially if you're somebody who's interested in, you may have developed something, but you like to sort of see that be used on a broader level with the community, like it to be tested in this kind of real way. I mean, it's an opportunity to suddenly, 100, 200 people or plus may, play with it in the course of the weekend.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and then you can wonder and say, OSCC powered by my toy.
Yes. And the ability too that, there are other coders in play, like, that if you're somebody who wants some feedback, or even like you're like, I've gotten this far, but maybe if I had a hook in this way or somebody else to collaborate in a different way, there's also the possibility of that, so yeah, definitely if you've got, this all kind of fits in that building / scripting angle, but if you're somebody who's got tools of any sorts that would also like that to be part of, that would be fantastic. And we'd love to have you volunteer. Beyond that, we also need folks who are willing to help us kind of get the word out, sort of the social media and communication stuff, both leading up to the event and also then during the event, and so that could be as easy as kind of, helping us sort of retweet or creating sort of some social graphics or kind of those sort of things, all the way up to if you're somebody who has a background or interest in wanting to like learn, kind of more social media communication skills in a kind of an event setting that, you could kind of become part of that team and help, strategize and schedule things and sort of set those things up. And, if you're of that ilk that appeals to you. And again, a lot of these things, especially things I think like the social media communication, some of these tool development stuff, they're all nice things that you can then also, if you're Open Simulator and the work that you do here is also dovetails with your professional life, that you can then kind of point back to that you were part of. So, they can also work in that way as well. But so yes, some folks to get the word out, even on a broader sense, of course, everybody can help get the word out. The Open Sim CC is the Twitter handle, and often we're sharing things there, and we have, a Facebook page and a Google Plus page and a group and that kind of thing. So there's ways to, even on an informal way, without signing up to be a volunteer, to kind of share and help get the word out. But if you want to get in deeper than that, we have volunteers for that. And then, as you said, moderators, which they're a little like we are kind of in the way of what, if you've ever wanted to do something in the way that we're doing here, like you want to end up being on a Skype call and helping introduce and maybe moderate some questions and that kind of thing. So if you've ever wanted to break into Mal's show in a weird way.
Well, I wish I would. We need more people breaking in.
That's kind of a great thing of that. And it could be as simple as, like I said, we set up scripts prior to, and where you kind of know who's coming up next and who you're presenting, and then if the panel or presenter wants to field questions, you're helping with that in the audience, and you also get to be up on stage and be on the camera and be in the footage and be in the archive and be credited or be listed in those credits for each video that you may be in. So a way for if you're interested in that sort of thing as well. But there's ultimately there's lots of different roles that I think people can help out in. So if you go to that conference.opensimulator.org site, it's also under that get involved. You'll see the call for volunteers, so that's, I encourage, anybody to, in essence, we're, the entire event is an all volunteer army, even each of us sitting here. So it takes all that to keep it running.
And remember, and also I'd like to mention that, we provide a lot of training. Again, I was a volunteer for 2 years, and it's, well, not just streaming. I mean, I certainly do my best to train train streamers, but everybody gets training. We make sure that everybody knows what's going on before they, if you're a greeter or if you're going to be a moderator, we're not just going to plop you on stage and have you wing it. That's not how it works, So you don't have to worry about that. We make sure you have everything you need ahead of time. We make sure you know how it works. We make sure you know where you need to be and at what time and all of that. So we basically every volunteer group has a person that spearheads it, and they make sure that you know exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. So don't let a fear of the unknown keep you away from volunteering.
Yeah, I'd even echo the fact that, the first time I volunteered, I was, of course, nervous about what was going to have to happen. And I mean, people do have your back. And so, you can try different things, and you don't have to be afraid of what you're doing in any way.
Yeah, and I will plug, since I am the big streaming guy.
Yep.
So I'll go ahead and plug that one a little bit more heavily. That is I think it is one of the scarier ones because it's so technical. And you're, in my head at least, it was, oh my God, all these people are going to see this, and if I mess it up, it's all on me. And I want to let people know, anybody who's a potential streamer, that no, it's not all on you. James is absolutely right. People have your back. And one of the nice things about the setup that Mal was talking about earlier with the ingest server I have and all that is that if for some reason something goes wrong with your computer and you crash or you lose power or anything like that, which we have had happen. I mean, things go wrong at a conference. They always do. But that's okay because I can, basically there's always somebody ready to jump in and pick up the stream right where you left off, and if you're able to reboot your computer or regain power or what have you, we can put you right back on. So we've tried to make it as easy and as painless as possible. We tell you what software to use, how to use it. We'll even one-on-one sit down with you and make sure you have everything you need to be a streamer. So don't be afraid. Volunteer to stream.
No motive there. No motive there at all.
No, none at all.
Well, as it says, it's training and you get your name in lights if you use you. James, well, you came in there, of course, too. But while we're still on Open Sim, have you got any thoughts or queries to put into this here?
No. I was thinking particularly about the the fact that the people don't have to worry about being afraid of trying to contribute, because on that same thought, we're all completely dependent on technology, and we know that technology cannot be 100% reliable, so we're all in the same boat in an open simulator world.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. And you were relieved to hear that at the top of Avacon or the top of OSCC, there is no AI currently running it.
I am indeed a real person.
Real human avatars. So
yes.
with all our own foibles and everything else. Okay, well, if we think of anything else, we'll come back to this. But since you're here, Joyce, there are two other areas of activity here of interest, I think. Now, one, of course, isn't really open sim, although I often wonder if it's non-profit commons, basically.
Sure.
Like, every time I get a message reminding me that that's on, and I don't normally because it's early in the morning, but I think, oh God, I got to log out and log into a viewer that will take me into Second Life, for it. I'd actually like to ask, as part of this question, have you got any thoughts about extending the non-profit commons activities into Open Sim? But over and beyond that particular question, what kind of it's every week on a Friday. What's kind of going on there coming up, or how's it going?
Sure. So it's in some ways, right? So Avacon is the 501c3 that I am part of the board of, and then obviously we're involved. We have various programs, including like helping sort of organize OSCC and stuff like that.
I was actually going to come to what's happening with Avacon.
Yeah. I won't go deep into that, but it just more sets the framework of the funniness of. So Nonprofit Commons initially was part of my, you would say, day gig, right? So I professionally I have a background in design and communications and stuff like that. So so a lot of the work I kind of falls either within those realms, including direct work within virtual environments that have to do with, design, social media, community engagement stuff. And Nonprofit Commons in October of 2012, I began there as their community manager. And it at the time it actually had started. Nonprofit Commons kind of has a long history in and of itself. TechSoup, Susan Tenby, who's a woman who works for TechSoup, and at the time, back in initially in 2005, 2006, kind of explored Second Life, as a lot of people were doing in those early years. Like, how can I use virtual environments to further what I'm doing professionally? You know, whether it's further the mission of what, you know, that their nonprofit was, or you know, further what you were doing for your company or whatever. So they were also exploring that space, and they started having these weekly community of practice meetings for nonprofits, because TechSoup itself had a mission of supporting nonprofits in a direct way, that nonprofits would go to them for resources for discounted software and that sort of thing. And their space in Second Life was also a part of that, as a meeting place for nonprofits to be able to get together to discuss tech topics, to discuss like community related topics, and also to explore the virtual environment itself and how it could be useful for furthering social good missions in general. So they began back then. And through my early days of interacting in the space, knew of them and had gone to meetings off and on through the years. And then through a prior coworker of mine, who had then gone to work for TechSoup to do some community management with their virtual community role. When he left, he was like, well, you know, maybe you should look up Joyce, who does these things. And so so that's how I started managing that community. So that was late 2012. And but again, those weekly meetings had been happening from 2006 onward. So they're every Friday, as you said. For some in the California time zone, they're kind of early, so they're at 8:30 Pacific time, and they go to 10 a.m. And it's an international community. So in some ways, it's, you know, it functions a lot like a physical meetup group might in the physical world, but yet folks are coming in from all around. And, you know, some folks are maybe from larger nonprofits, and they're like some staff role in there, and some people are maybe on a smaller level that have their own small little nonprofit. And then there's crossover folks that are like education and librarian folks, and others who are kind of like techies who want to do good, who kind of come to the meeting. So in earlier this year, TechSoup transitioned away from direct funding the space. So this is where it all goes back to why I had to preface what Avicon is. So they were transitioning away from being able to directly fund the space and the project. I mean, you know, granted, it had a long run from.
Well, actually, one thing I have to ask just before you move on there is basically the nonprofit commons regions in Second Life kind of act as hosts to a number of
smaller,
nonprofit
offices.
things too. And my lead in about Open Sim actually was just the thought of, you know, that you know, it may not be the individual organization, the nonprofit that's been hosted by the Commons that is paying, I don't know, but you know, the costs of space on that particular platform are pretty
higher.
astronomical. Compared
it's
with
definitely higher. And I mean, you know, for anybody who rode the wave of what it meant to be an educator or a nonprofit in the Second Life space, you know, at one point they had early on had a discount for folks that were either nonprofits or educational affiliated programs, and then for a while, for a couple of years, they took that away, and then they brought it back. You know, so it's definitely, there's been a ride involved there, and as you said, it is quite a dollar line item in people's budgets. So
especially nonprofits.
Yes, especially nonprofits. I mean, even, you know, to be fair, even for educators, you know, if you plan a certain amount for a project and then suddenly that changes, I mean, you can't get extra funding, whichever, if you're a nonprofit or a educational project. So because of my affinity and obviously, you know, so there's the sort of wearing two hats here, right? I was community manager as a kind of almost a consulting role, and then also, you know, on the board and helping, and part of that with Avicon. But Avicon itself, we to your point, we decided a couple of years back that we wanted to create not exactly like a nonprofit commons, but a similar resource to allow people to jump into Open Simulator that might be part of a nonprofit or an educational project in a way that would allow them to without that cost. So we do have a large community region on the Avacon, on our Avacon Open Simulator grid that we do have that's completely open. People just apply to be in it on a rolling basis, and for basically for a yearly term, and then that can be renewed. But so we have this community region that is open for nonprofits and educational focused projects to be able to come in and have free space for that period of time.
Do you have any regular NPC like meetings on that?
Not there. Though there are some regular stuff that is going on there, that some of the groups that are there. I mean, it's kind of still in its, the community region is still kind of in its, early days, at least in regards to our Open Simulator Avacon social good community. But we have, at this point, we probably have about a half a dozen people there, organizations, I should say. One of the larger ones is the Virginia Society for Technology and Education, have a large space there, and they host regular events there, including like a monthly, machinima screening and talk. They kind of watch, sort of come together and watch various machinima films and talk about them and kind of come up with resources that are good for educating folks using machinima. So they're kind of using the space, and then they have other events there too as well. But they're having a regular monthly meeting there, and there are others that are kind of using it more on, on a whatever their needs are for their particular nonprofit. So maybe they're not necessarily hosting events yet. And we certainly still have more space there. So if anybody's listening and you're either a nonprofit or an educator and need a home base to jump from, that at least on our Avacon grid, we have that. And that was a bit spurred initially too by at one point Korea was publishing a guide for those offering free space in the Open Simulator world, and we were, maybe we should do that, right? So that does exist. And conversely, though, nonprofit commons, this in Second Life still exists as well, and is in its own transition. In essence, Avacon picked up under its kind of Virtual Worlds community program piece to kind of hold the tier, in essence, until it organizes itself, and because we can take donations in as a nonprofit and be able to put them towards that and still continue to get the nonprofit rate. So it's in its transition, but moving towards becoming its own kind of entity. But the meetings still go on, and I still host those weekly meetings. So I'd love to
pay the tier.
What'd you say?
I said, and pay the tier by the sound of it.
Yes, yeah. Although, to be fair, we've had some generous donations too. I think where it's been such a useful community through the years, there are folks who, if they have the wherewithal, either they've been able to donate, and of course, if because Avacon is a 501(c) charity, that it's a tax deductible. So some folks have been able to generously donate, and they get the deduction, and that money goes towards there. It's the same thing that's happening with OSCC, right? That if you do donate to OSCC, that is tax deductible as well because of the relationship with Avacon producing it. So.
Yeah, and there's a fair amount of crossover between those social good people over in the nonprofit commons who are wonderful people, by the way. I'm not a member of any of the organizations, but I've been at their meetings and I've presented at least I think once so far. And they're wonderful people. So and yes, there's a plug coming up. I will be presenting, and this is in Second Life. Every Friday morning, Nonprofit Commons has a meeting, and on September 29th, Friday morning, I will be presenting there, and I will be giving a workshop presentation on how to stream, because it really is a valuable skill for all kinds of people.
And transferable, no matter if we're talking
exactly. I mean, the software we use, I mean, you can use it to I mean, it's what Mal uses for this show. You can use it to create tutorials. You can do it, you might want to record your own presentations, or if you're an educator, maybe you want to record your live classroom. You can do that too. So, that's all stuff that I'll be talking about at the presentation. And it will also mean that if you attend, you will learn how to be a streaming volunteer for OSCC. So
again, no motive.
No motive at all. So, but no, seriously.
This is the irony. You've got to somehow jump out of the metaverse and into Second Life to get the training you need to come back to the metaverse.
Well, like I said, there's a fair amount of crossover.
Yeah, I'm joking.
Yeah.
It's just a supreme irony that I can't hyper jump into Second Life.
Okay. Unfortunately, that's. I wish we could, and back in the day, right? So there was the when Linden Lab did have a interoperability team. I mean, that probably brings us to like 2007, 2008. There was talk of that, but that didn't obviously last long. So.
Yeah, I think Linden Labs, even with Sansar, their new project, it's so, everything they do is building a bigger wall around the wall garden and trying to monopolize. And good luck to them, but they're not. There's no interoperability.
But we will be. To Marcus's point, we have been talking about that too. There will be workshops prior to the OSCC, for within Open Simulator on the conference grid to teach people how to stream too.
Right, because the platform may not be interoperable, but people certainly are. You're not trapped on Second Life, so come to the dark side, come to Open Sim.
No, you're not trapped in there. You just can't jump from one to the other, I suppose. So you
close. Yeah. And I think that's probably what locks a lot of people there, though, is the content, right? They don't want to leave the content.
Yeah, but there wouldn't be any content if somebody hadn't gone there in the first place to make it. Anyway,
yes, it's true.
That's
the chicken for the egg, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, forgetting non-profit comments for a minute, looking at Avacon in the greater respect. Avacon obviously acts as an umbrella for the Everton Community Conference, partly because you've got background expertise in running world conferences. I was talking a Second Life Community Conference, although this one is strictly virtual. What's Avacon up to is, as itself, it obviously has the Avacon grid. It is host to another one you are host to is the library part of Rockcliffe University. That's the only bit that seems to have moved out of Second Life to a more economic location. But and of course, within the last year, in fact, Marcus here, as well as his involvement in streaming and all this other stuff, actually works for Avacon now, I gather, to a certain extent. So, I keep asking Marcus, what's he doing? Oh, it's Avacon stuff. You're keeping him busy, I think.
Yeah.
But is there anything exciting happening under the Avacon brand, so to speak? I mean, apart from OSCC and the non-profit commons which connect.
Yeah. So certainly, obviously, they kind of, again, as a nonprofit, all these things are sort of programs that are kind of under a larger umbrella of things, right? And certainly, OSCC is, now that we've started up the organizational thing, it's going to be a big focus of what we're doing for the next few months. Yes, the nonprofit commons thing is a place. We also have, as I brought up, kind of a similar companion-y type thing, but our own social good community in the Avacon grid, is similar but separate, right? So that's something that we've been focusing on. To that effect, we've been working on kind of recreating the community space there, and factoring in like both resources and like if a new user comes to that community, like what are best like resources they need, both in like content stuff. So we've been kind of working on content, working on like the build itself, sort of as thinking of it as a larger user interface for people, whether that be new users or people who are part of it. So we've been doing work around that. And then along that also like developing some, kind of tutorially and training related things, which is probably what Marcus was talking about and when he was sort of some of that busy stuff. Because we did a whole series of kind of tutorial trainings. We tackled first the initial piece of building. One of the, besides you brought up Rockcliffe, there are several organizations that have come to us that wanted, a footprint or be an open simulator and kind of be associated on a grid that was, nonprofit, social good, educational focus in general. Yeah. So we kind of paired up with us. So Rockcliffe is obviously one of those, and they, as you said, they have 4 regions, I can't remember, but they have several regions on our grid. 4, yes, thank you. And including their library, and also it's the space where when they do VWBPE, if they do any open simulator focused talks or topical related stuff during their Virtual Worlds Best Practices in Education conference, they have that in our grid in their regions. There's also been a couple other projects that have groups that have come to us that maybe initially were wanting to be part of our broader community region, but what they were doing was sort of more or slightly not quite right for that. So one particular thing is we have housed in the Avacon grid under Arizona State University. There's a project. It was called originally CompuGirls. Girls. Now it's called CompuPower. But they're a NSF, National Science Foundation funded project that they originally had started on another grid that doesn't even exist anymore, and then kind of came to us because they needed a home, and they bring in. They actually have youth that work in there, so they're like in the school systems, and like the middle and high school systems in Arizona, and then paired up with Arizona State University resources and other things. So for them, because we're dealing with youth, we kind of cordoned off 2 regions for them specifically, and they're kind of a little like Rockcliffe, where they're in the grid, but they're not directly in the community region, and they're locked down even more so in the fact that you kind of have to be part of that. They're not
hypergridable because they got kids in them, basically.
Well, yeah, you're not able to go into them because they're locked down to the group and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So, but so there are projects like that are happening within the grid. You can kind of come to the edge of the community region and sort of zoom in from afar to see the edge of their regions and what they're building. But in essence, they're working in they have a kind of a quarterly approach to various technology related things, and one of it might be Internet of Things or digital media literacy skills, or like maker space type stuff, and also virtual environments is one of them. And as that, the students once a quarter out of the school year are going in there and working on stuff that relates to their sort of science technology related things, but in the virtual environment, they're kind of being supplemented by it. So that's going on in our grid, and we have been supporting them both in creating resources. So some of those training resources, the videos we were doing, were kind of direct requests from their needs, and then from there jumping from there. So so now there's a whole series, and I'm sure Marcus can probably share a link to you that you can put up on the show notes or whatever. But there's a whole kind of series of kind of how to get into and sort of initially set up your viewer and log into Open Simulator, which those are useful. And we'll probably create a variant of that for the conference, so anybody going to the CC will see them. And then a whole series of building videos, like how to actually build in Open Simulator.
Well, actually, I think the easiest way is if people are interested in watching those, they should just go to YouTube and search for Avacon, Because
Yes.
they're all published on the Avacon account. That would be my recommendation. Is the simplest way of getting to them, to be honest. Yes, there was a whole flurry of them in recent months, actually, particularly some weeks. There was, it was quite a lot coming up in rapid succession. So it's a good resource.
They're usable by anybody. I mean, we've tried to. I mean, as I said, they started as a specific need for what Compu Girls / Compu Power needed, and they relied on back in my earlier professional thing. I worked for several years doing digital media literacy and virtual worlds with local kids, which is a nonprofit in the city, and we had developed back then a curriculum focused around using Second Life in schools, but made sure that was actually Creative Commons licensing. So from that, from the curriculum that I helped work on back then, there's been many people that have revamped it, including folks on our end, to apply it to Open Simulator, and sort of to use some of that basic framework, but then strip out, of course, scripting is very different, and some of the other, the import and export, some of those features that are very different and additional to Open Simulator. Our hope that those are now kind of what we're working in as well. So there'll probably be more curriculum research, more learning videos that'll come out of this as time goes on. So, whether it's the resources that come out of OSCC or the resources that come out of these other programs, Avacon tries to release that to the larger community in this sort of Creative Commons sharing aspect, so.
Okay, let me move. I'm moving into two areas now. I'm probably going to be moving into opinion a bit rather than just facts. I've been privy to a couple of conversations recently, right, where people are actually saying, why isn't there a foundation for OpenSim? And, to put this in perspective, obviously, when the conference, OCC, first started, the umbrella was actually kind of Avacon and a foundation called Overt. Now, when Justin Clark-Lacey had to move on from OpenSim and get into his, molecular biology or something he does now, but basically the Overt Foundation sort of went with him. I don't mean he took the foundation with him. I mean the foundation really ceased to be when he left. But do you think that, and I'm asking you personally here now, although you can weigh your Avacon out if you want.
Sure.
Do you think there is actually a need for some kind of foundation? Don't forget all these projects that are going on, bringing things together, be it Avacon, IMA, or whatever. Do you actually think there is some kind of need for a foundation rather than a boss of OpenSim, which, forget it, some kind of foundation that guides things but basically performs what Overt endeavored to do in its lifetime?
So first off, Overt actually dissolved the formal nonprofit structure before he left.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Right.
So, ultimately, and here's through the years of doing these things, the most business and nonprofit structures aren't very well kind of updated to how we work in these global virtual world environments, right? So that lends a lot of complexities. Like suddenly you're not like, well, what are the legalities and rules and for incorporating and financial things if we were talking about if this was just a U.S. entity or if this was whatever. But now if you're talking about a larger foundation, I mean, so there's a lot of complexity there, right? And on a lot of levels, that would be kind of, I think, hard to kind of go that route. And I think in some ways that's ultimately what Overt you know, that was the kind of the rub in that regard. And I know even on the Avacon side of things, you know, when you're talking about bringing people in to work for you, or and I'm sure people who may have experienced this in regards to even on a company, just a traditional company for-profit side of things, you know, we all work collaboratively in these virtual environments, regardless of if you're in the U.S. or if you're in whatever state you're in the U.S.
Yeah.
or if you're in another country, or it doesn't matter. But in the ramifications of stuff, if you know, I or somebody else were to hire you or as an employee, suddenly now we're an international company territory and laws and financial things, and it's just very complicated in that regard. So I think that's kind of held in the way. I mean, on the software code side of things, I mean, the core developers, you know, nothing happened to the core developers except for obviously Justin left and other people have kind of faded in and out based on you know, their life needs and whatever was going on with them. But the core code people still do exist. So, I mean, they didn't. So even if you look at like what the languaging on the OSCC site is, it's like still, you know, we still convene with talking with Krista and a lot of the other core developer folks, Melanie and Ubit. We're at several meetings like that. So I think so. They're still kind of functioning in a similar way. They just didn't want the complexities of the business structure, which I can understand why.
And my understanding, and I was never part of Overt, I'm not part of OpenSim Core, and I was just an observer of events. But my understanding was that Overt was never intended to be an OpenSim foundation per se.
And they were just managing.
They needed right, and it was Justin was certainly a major player in the creation and management of Overt, but basically what it came down to, again, this is just my understanding, is that there have been large code contributions from large organizations and companies, everybody from Moses to Microsoft to IBM to Intel. And some of those organizations needed, you know, basically as a comfort blanket. They needed to know that there was a
legal entity,
right? Where they, if they made code contributions, that, you know, there was a document that said, yes, we are giving you this code. This code is, you know, licensed in such and such a way, and all that kind of stuff. That was all Overt did. So
yeah,
you know,
they were never really setting themselves up for the financial piece of to distribute things. So.
It was, to be honest, when I asked the question, yeah, well, I was thinking of obviously a foundation is a business, but I mean, you know, conceptually like a trust or something that is there that handles that.
I certainly think,
stuff, but also it is something that's there in spirit rather than, you know, in any role that actually controls.
Yeah, and in terms of your original question, I think that OpenSim, in my personal opinion, speaking only for myself, is that Open Simulator could certainly benefit from, you know, a proper roadmap. They could certainly benefit from a proper, you know, a little less chaos. But it's kind of academic. The reality is that OpenSim Core, you know, is composed of the people it's composed of, by the people who have taken an interest and the people who actually contribute. And those people are primarily motivated by, you know, their own interests and their own, for some people it's financial, for other people they just want, you know, a platform to play their RPG on, or, you know, a platform to, you know, have social events on. Right, exactly.
And there are obviously, and to be fair too, there are deeper still academics and researchers involved as well, you know. But so yes,
nobody pays those people. I mean, I mean, so, you know, there's no real incentive for, you know, a roadmap.
And
that's kind of how it is.
And in some ways, it's not even like incentives. Not necessarily. I mean, like, you can get personal satisfaction incentive, but I think if, you know, even we talked about Justin leaving, like if it comes down to the idea that you know, we all need to pay our mortgages and eat, and you know what I mean, all those sort of finer things of life, that those sort of sort your time in the world and if you know what I mean, you kind of have to parcel away time in order to be able to do those sort of things. So I think,
Yeah.
you know, that's become an issue. And if somebody's not paying you for that time, then how do you still, you know, pay your bills and eat, you know?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, as much as, and I know I went down that like company foundation route, but they're sort of in this weird way, you know, they're sort of like, I think, combined in a way. I mean, and if you look at, you know, obviously I think IMA is trying.
Yeah, I was just going to say, between the conference last year and now, of course, we have seen the emergence of the IMA. Now, you know, it's still early days for them, for example. I mean, supposedly they are trying to reflect the user, especially disability needs, but basically used from a user thing and test things. And they always said their remit was non-interference with anybody, you know, just maybe pulling people together and stuff like that. And it seemed to be going fairly well for a few months, although they kind of opened up and announced themselves a bit earlier than they intended. There's some leakage or other, I think. And I've refused any more to go into these things. But I mean, you know, more lately there's been a bit more of the drama emerging. You know, it's like the old thing of the open core devs don't want to be involved with any other devs because they're the core, and you know, people don't always collaborate and cooperate. And I always thought the IMA thing was exactly the opposite of that. It was try and, you know, working groups, for example. You know, you got 3 people working on a web interface for a lightweight virtual world. OpenSim wise, and despite the fact they're working on 3 different projects, the 3 different projects meet in the working group to kind of collaborate or share what they want to share, I guess. So, you know, it's like we have this thing in Britain, you know, and if you run a business, you know, you can, you know, you join a professional club, you know, and you hang out with the other CEOs. Now, in the daytime, you're all at each other's necks competing, but, you know, in the downtime, you're all sitting there drinking your champagne together and sort of gossiping of the state of the industry. You know, there is that level of social involvement that kind of allows, it's like the hidden pipes that allow for communication, even if publicly, you know, it's 2 rivals. It's like imagining the heads of Apple and Google and Microsoft actually having a private club somewhere where they go and natter when they're not busy arguing in public, you know. So I don't know what the future of the IMA is, but I noticed you just mentioned that, and I was wondering what your feelings about that are actually in general, because it's new since last year, really.
I mean, I think there's room for all of this stuff, right? Like, I mean, obviously, like Avicon, when we came in, we were kind of looking at a specific thing, like you brought up the whole Second Life community conventions, right? We had already gone down that path of how do you bring together a community and get them to also then be able to like be in the same space as the people running the platform, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that was the foundation behind our thought of like, well, we'll talk to, you know, we'll kind of get involved with over and sort of do that same role here. So I mean, we kind of focus on that community piece, which is still important. Like, we're not, you know, the developers are getting together too, but we're also bringing developers and the users, and some important things through that have been solved over time. Like that whole, remember when we had that whole kind of bug / feature in Open Simulator where you would have to kind of you jump from one landing zone to another. I can't remember what that was.
Upper level.
Yeah.
It was one line of code that nobody had noticed.
Yes, one line of code that it, you know, until like that, you know, like a conversation ensued at the OSCC that then somebody was like, oh, you know, I think I can fix that, and they're, you know, so those are the things that we hope to, you know, that we kind of focus on. I mean, as for IMA, you know, I think, you know, they're, as you said, they're still sort of in this nascent stage of early on. And I think as they kind of continue to meet and go through their working groups, hopefully, and figure out what either the things that they want to test, and maybe, you know, we were talking about the importance of tools before, right? Maybe some of those things come out as tools, which that's great. Yeah. Maybe they come out, you know, I think there's, and Krista herself has kind of brought to the strength of that, right? The idea that there's the ability to kind of plug in modules. Like those are great spaces where people can develop for and plug into. So if there's like, we were talking
I'm a big fan of the modular sort of thing. It's just a shame that our views and things really aren't that at the moment. But the idea,
I mean, again, I think that comes down to sadly like time and funding, right? If you could find somebody who was willing to fund, and that will, I mean, on my own personal opinion, that will probably have to happen at some point. I mean, I think
absolutely
we've got. I mean, it should have happened long ago. For Open Simulator to truly kind of, I think, shine on its own and not be quite as this.
Well, actually, of course, a lot of people are slightly worried at the moment about the changes in what Linden Lab's doing. It may actually turn Firestorm into a Second Life only viewer, and it won't be usable. Future versions won't be usable in OpenSim. It means less and less viewers will be compatible with OpenSim. You'll still be able to use an old version or, some viewers around, but, it does reiterate the fact that, there's still... even to come in here and do this TV show, we've got to come in a viewer that, is a legacy.
Do you happen to know specifically what changes they're worried about?
It's, not exactly, because there seem to be a lot of them. One is that, in whatever sense you take it, the lab appears to be moving to what they call cloud servers. I mean, I always think of the Linden Lab servers as a cloud anyway, but maybe it's just a farm. It depends on how you think of cloud. It's an overabused word, really. Everything on the web is in a cloud, if you ask me. But
to address that,
it's to do with things like. I gather it will operate more like Kitely, with second life regions.
Let me comfort some people. The Second Life grid is already a cloud. All right, it's already a cloud. All they're talking about is moving it off of their servers. So. There are some infrastructure changes that are coming. They're going to be doing some HTTP infrastructures coming in. Guess what? Umarov is already has a branch of Open Simulator already for the next version of OpenSim. So I wouldn't be. This happens quite a lot in our community. People get afraid, and that fear has an unfortunate frequency to echo and get louder. And I wouldn't worry too much.
Nothing is going to change overnight. And as we said in previous talks, if suddenly Firestorm does become unusable in OpenSim, there's no to stop you just keeping the version that does work in OpenSim running rather than update to the new one. We'll have to see. I mean, to me, actually, the important thing about what Second Life seems to be intending is rather like Cowardly, they're going to have built-in redundancy. So if nobody's in a region, it won't be online. That means you're going to have holes in their flat Earth map, And
again, they already do that.
Exactly. But, it depends on how much you, as the user, are aware of it. Certainly, I know if I hypergrid over to Kitely, it's only a momentary delay. It's no real problem at all. But I am, as a user, aware that I'm being put in a way station for all of 10 seconds while the grid is region's brought online. And it doesn't really bother me at all. I've got used to it. I know other hypergrid jumps take even longer than the jump to Kitely in the first place. So it's not terrible, but it is something I'm aware of as a user. Now, and I think that makes all the difference, because when you're talking about fast, easy to use and everything else, you really want to minimize the things that the user is aware of going on in the background. You want the user to be aware of what they can do and where they can go, not what's going on in the background. And to me, Second Life was modeled on this permanent world that's always there. It's regions, islands, continents and stuff. And what Kitely do in OpenSim is a different model. Even OpenSim itself, I mean, the idea is that all those grids on the hypergrid are online. Yeah, it's distributed, but, it still works that way. And to suddenly have a region on demand model coming in could be disruptive. But I don't know the details, but I know there are a lot of other things that people, oddly enough, people not less in OpenSim, but in Second Life have been looking at in what Linden are announcing. And I think what they're doing is they've got Sansar, which is their new modern state-of-the-art platform, though it's not maybe quite what it should be. But they are still looking at, their cash cow, Second Life, and they need to update Second Life to be much more state-of-the-art insofar as they can. They can't rebuild the whole code, but they can take a lot of steps, like the way they licensed, the Havoc engine, for example. So there's elements of that in the Second Life version of Firestorm that can't be used in OpenSim because it's not Linden Labs proprietary, it's licensed from Havoc, but, it's not open. And, more Linden Labs may choose to do those things to supposedly enhance their platform, it may be to the detriment of OpenSim. I mean, but one thing that is not going to change, and that is the economics of OpenSim for anybody wanting to start in virtual worlds, whether as a creator, user, or, community. The economics here are, far more practical than the money you have to pay into Linden Lab. So that's not going to go away. OpenSim's does not go anywhere, and it's a hypergrid. But, it may be, that Linden's themselves will implement enough changes so that it's really beginning to become quite a clean divorce.
Yeah, I don't think again this is all stuff they've all you nailed it on the head. They're very Linden Lab, as much as I love OpenSim and I love to talk about OpenSim, and yeah, I think OpenSim is definitely better than Second Life in a lot of ways, but Linden Lab and Second Life deserve a huge amount of credit for the development they put into their platform over time. They really have some very skilled people who have made an enormous amount of investment of time and money into making sure that they're, like you said, everything appears seamless. But again, I want to reiterate, they're already a cloud. They already do on-demand. They already do all that. I don't think there's any real reason to worry about viewers suddenly becoming incompatible. I really, really don't.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll just have to wait and see. There are scaremongers around, but this did seem to be quite serious from what I read. But I'm no techie; I don't understand half of what I'm reading. I'm just sort of, this person normally knows what they're talking about. I'll make a note of that. Yeah, but I often make cynical jokes about that old granddaddy with walls around it. The ancient castle of the metaverse. But OpenSim wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be doing all these things we're doing now if it hadn't been for Philip Linden and Corey and people, the pioneers of Second Life at Linden Lab. Even they've moved on to other things now, but so that is part of the legacy. I wouldn't I don't knock Linden Lab in that sense. I wish they could find a way to have guest hypergrid in with limited functions, and I wish they would allow maybe people to get momentarily go out of that world. I think not being part of a metaverse is like a world wide web of immersive worlds, and for Linden Labs to be so deliberately heading away from that with bigger and bigger walls between them and the rest of the metaverse, it doesn't seem to be long-term a wise move. I think they might regret it in maybe 10 or 12 years' time. They're not going to regret it immediately now because it seems to be the pattern that other worlds, other enterprises, especially since the rise of VR, are taking. But, to me, the thing I look at, is science space of value to me, is high fidelity of value to me, is Second Life of value to me. And it's really the degree of possible collaboration and interoperability that counts. I mean, You know, if I can open, we were talking about this, I think it might even have been last week's show, you know, if somebody Dito is working on this grid phone thing at the moment, you know, you can possibly have a pipe where the communication channels can link to Second Life and Science Space and High Fidelity and OpenSim. Now, it doesn't mean those aren't different platforms, but it means in a modular way, there's a plugin created that can plug into both of those platforms. You can't take objects and Science Space and put them in OpenSim, but you could possibly have a voice conversation across the region, the platforms, because those modules are platform independent and or at least are able to be plugged in to each of the separate platforms. So somebody tell, you know, like Science Space, for example, Adam Frisbee was one of the founders of OpenSim. He owes a debt of gratitude in the way to Second Life, and Science Space, the company, of course, too, because they sold God knows how much stuff is virtual goods in Second Life. That's where they made their money. But their platform has been built over 7 years or something. You know, Adam runs it, and everything else is built in Unity. It's a very different beast, but this is from the founder or one of the founders of OpenSim. He knows his business, and he still keeps an eye on OpenSim when nobody's looking. But behind that, they know their company has to make money. And they know, it's going to be virtual goods and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean they're not open to interoperability things that they won't necessarily need to integrate into their infrastructure for, making money, the baseline. If you can advertise, it's like advertising OpenSim. You can go look at DigiWorlds, for example. They to all intents and purposes, they're like Inworlds. They are differences on the hypergrid, of course, but they advertise for residents, they advertise for businesses who want to be hosted by them and everything else. But the plus point is you can be on the hypergrid. So, it's a commercial thing, but the selling point is that people can visit you via the hypergrid and that your users can come out. But, they're... as I say, they've got their package, and certain elements of it are kept within that corporate, selling, because the company as a hosting or a grid owner needs to make money. But the selling points are actually that open system. And I think, if VR takes off in any way, and I'm talking about, all this, fancy new stuff, but even if the long term, the metaverse and OpenSim take off, down the road, there is no future in walled gardens because, imagine the World Wide Web had been built as a walled garden, without the
and there were people who tried that, obviously, AOL and others, right?
And, and AOL lasted for a long while. Well, not very long, really, but in web terms. But the thing is, what Linden Lab can get away with and what, other closed platforms can get away with in the next few years may be very different from what they'll be able to get away with in the long run.
Yeah, I think Second Life has content. It has the users, it has their marketplace, and it's got, because of all of those things and more, they've got momentum. I don't think Second Life, I hear every once in a while somebody saying, oh, Second Life's going to be dead in a year or 2 years or something, and I don't think that's true. I think that Linden Labs is going to keep Second Life running as long as they possibly can. And when it comes to, and on the other point of an open web, I think in terms of all the platforms we talked about, and I'm actually a fan of all of them for one reason or another. I've actually been spending more time in Science Space recently, for example. But I'm also quite a fan of Hi-Fi because of their open source approach. And Philip Linden, or Philip Rosedale, who of course founded Second Life. Back in the day, originally the viewer was not open sourced, and before it was open sourced, Philip was still in charge, and there was a point where they considered integrating speed tree technology into the viewer. And again, this is before the viewer was open sourced, and I think they explored it. And I think my impression, again, I don't know what happened. I don't get to go behind, Linden Lab stores and listen to their meetings. Nobody does really. But what seemed to happen to me was Philip put the kibosh on, no, we're not having a closed proprietary component because then we can't open source. And soon after the SpeedTree idea dropped off the map, the viewer was open sourced. And I don't think it's a coincidence that soon after Philip's first tenure as CEO, Havoc became part of the viewer. And since then, as you've said, it's become more. They've become more and more willing to be more closed and more proprietary. Whereas now with Philip with High Fidelity, it's an open source platform. All the code for both the viewer and the servers. So it actually there's absolutely nothing stopping anybody except for the time and the effort from making, for example, Open Simulator and Hi-Fi compatible.
I think it could well happen because there are, as you say, Philip will be Philip, and that openness is part of his vision, his thing.
Oh yes,
and it's something he shares with Adam. They're both running corporations, but they are both of that kind of sensibility of something beyond.
Oh yes, absolutely. Adam's a wonderful.
Linden Labs management now. Their current CEO is probably the best they've had since Philip, and is almost, but he's taken the job to run this company, and they
have a board, they have investors,
the board,
different things.
His remit, is employed by the board, basically. His remit is not to make Second Life, interoperate with competing platforms or however they view it.
But that changed long ago. I mean, that's a bigger conversation for anybody. I mean, the minute you get investors involved and people on your board, and I mean, that's, things can change, right? So
but you got to remember, CEOs go to boardrooms and they deliver state of the thing. If I was a CEO and I went to a board who would tell me to remain a walled garden because they want to monopolize all the income and profits, then I would say to them, well, if that's what you're ordering me to do, I'm going to have to do it. And I think you will make a bit more money for the next few years. I agree. But I think you will be losing more money in 10 years because of that strategy. And the board, I would think, as CEO, are going to listen to me. So, I mean, there is a bit of swings and roundabouts there. But, it's, as you say, we're Linden, as we're talking about walled garden, and we will continue to be for a long while, I think. I know that the figures I'm getting from what you can get out of Second Life, it does sound like, they're in decline already, and possibly all these new things they're bringing in there to try and revitalize it. But it's all these things are very slow, gradual things. Second Life won't go away for a long while, even if it continues to decline to the point where they can't run it anymore. I mean, you're talking about a lot of years, probably. And likewise, the decline possibly of closed ecosystems, walled gardens, that bucks the trend. At the moment, if the trend is build your own ecosystem and monopolize and make a lot of money. I'm not just talking about virtual worlds. I'm talking about, the web. You build a portal, a service, or an app or something, then you buy up more and you integrate more into your big empire. And you do your best to stop anything competing. You either buy up the competitor or you copy something they're doing that you haven't already got. And, everything's geared to, companies trying to own and have their own version of everything rather than cooperating with a community of what's out there.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think, something like the web is the future. And I think that is one of the Achilles heels of OpenSim because of our viewer. We're really held back by, we have the hypergrid, and the hypergrid is a wonderful, wonderful addition to Open Simulator. Krista Lopes deserves a huge giant medal pinned on her. Seriously, that was not a trivial undertaking because she had to jump through ridiculous hoops to make it happen with the Linden viewer. And that's part of the reason I brought up Hi-Fi, though, was because what Phil is doing over there is you don't need a hypergrid. Anybody can run what is essentially a simulator, anybody. And then all they need, there is no central login server. That's kind of stuff, you're not constrained to that. It's much more decentralized. So all you need is a URL.
I actually find that the model of Hi-Fi is actually very, very close to for Outworld's install. I basically, because I use this DNS server, it means I'm logging into Metaworld at outworlds.net. But that's simply to stop me having to type in my own private domain address. It's a sort of routing system. Now, when I would log into Hi-Fi, I can actually optionally turn the sandbox off. But basically what happens is I log into High Fidelity's servers. But the moment I click my home button, it takes me to my sandbox, which is actually on my machine.
Yeah,
it's simply a loopback mechanism. I'm actually hosting all my own High Fidelity space. I just don't think of it that way because I make a jump into Hi-Fi to come back into my sandbox.
Yeah, and I think what Phil is doing.
The Sim install works very much the same. I log in to my own grid on my desktop via an address at Outworlds that simply creates the loopback code to my own IP address.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if I hypergrid to somewhere from this grid, I'm going on to another part of the metaverse. And if I go to a location in High Fidelity, I'm jumping out of my home sandbox into somebody else's sandbox because all those sandbox regions in High Fidelity are on people's own machines, just like a self-hosted OpenSim. So if you could take the code that's operating on the server level and find ways of creating links between Open Simulator code and High Fidelity sandbox code and things, it hasn't been done there. That won't be me that tries to do it, but the possibilities are there because if the metaverse is something, if your home space, your room or whatever it is hosted on your own computer, and that is your base for traveling, if you see what I mean, then what you actually need is a viewer that enables to travel out from that. But because the actual starting space is on your own computer, it could possibly combine, the code for different platforms. I don't mean you can merge different platforms into one, but they can maybe over the time be configured to interoperate. So you basically your home grid is your desktop. And from there, you move out from it, and of course, whatever your desktop is serving, it isn't necessarily the vanilla version of OpenSim that is at the moment. It could be something that allows a lot more. Just as if I'm in High Fidelity, I've got an OpenSim server running, and I've got a High Fidelity server running simultaneously. And they don't talk to each other; they're just there. But who's to say? If their job is to serve this stuff, that they can't talk to each other.
Joyce.
Now I'm talking. I have bored.
Oh, I'm here though.
Yeah. we got you on voice. I was just going to say I bored Joyce's avatar to death.
What's?
I mean, it hasn't just gone to sleep. It fell through the chair.
It fell out.
It fell off the grid.
I was just watching this weekend again the end of Star Wars Galaxies. And I think that's the thing that motivates me most about Open Simulator is that, I just have this feeling of security that it can't be shut down. Like something like all the people that contributed to Star Wars Galaxies. And then, there was a lot of grief and a lot of pain when that was just shut down. And, I think, from that user perspective, you know, the machination or the machinations of corporations and organizations. It's still that's the biggest value of the of OpenSim, open source.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think it's whether it's no matter what platform it is, it's the users and what they do and what they create that ultimately make the difference. I mean, absolutely.
You know, enterprises, corporations, or enterprises, even non-profits and everything else, they come and go, right?
Yeah.
But the hypergrid has nowhere to go. It is. The code is there. It may stop being developed, but it's still there. Viewers are there. They may not be. They may be upgraded and not work, but they're still there. There is no reason the hypergrid can ever go, because it's not an entity that one person is running or owns that can take it away.
I've sometimes wondered if, and this is just a hypothetical, it's like, well, what if OpenSim did die? What if all the core developers went away and stopped, and people stopped developing it, and, you know, or the viewer or whatever? And to me, I think it wouldn't ever truly die. It would, people would keep running it. It would be like, you know, like IRC. IRC has been around. Internet Relay Chat has been around since the 80s. And it still won't die. I think OpenSim is in a place where it won't ever die, no matter what. I really do.
I would tend to agree with that, you know, because it is all open source. It can be deployed, and you also have to remember that, we get all this controversy about the core devs not talking to, I don't know, say Freaky Tech, because he's doing a RebaSim and insisted on rewriting it all himself, or I forget half the others at White Core or something. This is on the platform level.
You know,
But
the
then,
drama.
but then there are, let me finish. Then there are other things that you can actually say, take DigiWorlds and Great Canada Grid and people like Terra4 who are handling that. They're not writing their own versions of OpenSim, and they will actually presumably take the 09 series code to update their grids and their services. But they are heavily tweaking that code for their own purposes. And quite frankly, if the OpenSim core vanished and wasn't there anymore, there are still people like that running commercial grids or just grids of their own that will continue tweaking the code. In fact, they'll probably be less restrained, because they'll be like Inworlds. They can.
Well, absolutely. I think there'll always be people who are going to keep developing it, whether it's their own little fork or whatever. And I can't help it. I have to address that little drama point. When it comes to things like that, the drama is way overblown. No, the OpenSim core devs do not accept every piece of code that's offered to them. But you know what? Yeah. Just the other day, and you can go look for yourself in the log of the Git commits for Open Simulator. Just the other day, I saw a code commit accepted from Freaky Tech, and the code commit says thanks to Freaky Tech in it. So, loosen up. Really, the drama is way overblown.
Listen, I'm going to,
good perspective.
I make these, I throw in names here not because I'm actually citing them as such. It's like a for example thing, right? Yeah, I know Freaky Tech, submits this here and that. Everybody knows each other. I'm not, I have no time for that kind of drama. I'm just saying, when I think of a different strand to OpenSim other than Vanilla Core, I think of Freaky. It's not because of Freaky's Freaky, but he's got a RebaSim. For some reason, I'm more aware of that in my mind. I can never remember the name of White Core and some of the other derivatives. Yeah, the only other one I could think of is Halcyon, but there's loads of them.
Yeah, he's currently the most active, really.
What I was doing is I was citing Freaky as maybe an example. I didn't say he wasn't cooperating with them, for Christ's sake. I'll probably have IMs floating up from him in the background any second now, saying I didn't say that, or I'm not like that. That is not my point here. When I say for example, I'm not expecting a reply as if I sent it was a fact. I say, for example, because I want to indicate an example. giving something as an example of a possibility is not the same as announcing it as.
Well, I wasn't trying to imply that you were causing the drama. That was not my intention. It's just I know that other people can take things out of context.
Yeah, and there's definitely drama out there.
I'm a bit worried about Joyce.
I'm here, but not here. So
yeah, I should have made an NPC of you before you went, so I could dump it on the chair and pretend you were
just
still
make
there.
me stand at the sit at the table. I'm just a disembodied voice right now. That's what you have to live with.
Fair enough. Well, if anything can go wrong, it will. Right. Okay, well, actually, I'm beginning to wonder. I always do my closing thing. Let's go to your disembodied voice, Joyce. We'll put a picture.
Sure.
We'll put a picture of the Open Sim conference on screen while you're talking. I think we've covered quite a lot actually, but when we're concluding, I tend to like to go around asking people, what else,
So the one thing we didn't really talk about is the idea that we also opened up the call for proposals, which is a big thing. So, so if you want to present, or whether as a panel or present whatever interesting. I mean, we're having all these conversations about the complexities and the variousness of Open Simulator. I mean, there's lots of room to bring up either the project or the work you're doing, or even talk about some of whether it be on a technical nature, or whether it be more on you've done work on some learning educational project, or you're working on something like one year we had a whole feature on bots. I mean, there's lots of ability. Like, that's another thing not to be intimidated by. I think folks often think of like a call for proposals that you would have to be like an educator or somebody, something formal in that regard. Where this is a community project, we certainly do have, quality content, but that doesn't mean that that it can't come from anybody in the community. So
yeah, I think there's sometimes. Avacon is particularly involved with, we talked about earlier, non-profits, but also education. You're involved in education. Fleep, of course, when she was around, heavily involved in education. But this is OSCC. Avacon is the umbrella, but it's not governing the whole thing. And this is not an education conference. We have Virtual's best practice in education for that, if you really want. So it is very much, isn't it, open to anything really to do with work and best practice in Open Sim. Generally,
yes. and even a lot of the creative things, like last year, obviously we had the Avatar Repertory Theater, and we did a whole live performance there. We've had, as we said, we've had folks talk about the varying uses of bots in many ways, whether that be from, the more formal learning related uses of them, all the way up to like things that are more like the storytelling aspects that Nara, Malone, and Ferd have done, and so there's lots of room for that, and even on the the less technical things, like folks that have done like various projects and stuff that or simulation-y type builds, experiences that would apply. So I invite anybody in regards to the community that submit a proposal and don't feel intimidated by the fact that you don't have to have an educational diploma degree behind you in that regard, and if you think it merits it, like if it can be part of a panel, like bring together a bunch of people. I know we've been talking about the idea of the hypergrid, right? And and having a panel focus this year on that, all the way from somebody like Krista, who's developed it, to be on that panel, to folks like Thurza, who have kind of navigated it extensively, and anything in between. So
and I don't know whether it's worth people putting this in proposals, because obviously we want presentations and stuff like that. I mean, you go to conference.opensimulator.org and you go to the call for proposals, and there's a form there ready to fill in. It's more than 2 lines, but it's not it's not a mammoth essay. You just got to have an idea of what you want to do and fill in the appropriate bits where there is. But if there are actually thousands of proposals, obviously the organisers are going to choose the ones that be the best highlights or the best variety. It's very hard to tell. Normally, it's like a nice balance, but it won't be unheard of. For somebody to make a proposal and say, well, we don't think that, we can give you, a presentation based on that, but it sounds really interesting. And would you like to be on this panel?
Yes, yeah, and we've done that.
I know we've done that. So it's when you've got a corporate proposals, basically it's like a stack of papers. We can also say they want to do a talk, or maybe they'll just be better on the panel. But you look through them and we see what's out there and what people are doing. If you haven't put too much information in because you're a bit not quite sure of how to detail it on the form, the important thing I think is to get the form in. To show your interest rather than
and we
tell.
And we usually, of course, we weigh back to people, and sometimes that we bring people together because we see a pattern, right? Like the bots was one idea, that one particular one where there were 3 or 4 presentations that were like, well, these should all be like that. They were talking each about their unique uses of them, and like, well, let's create a panel around that, right? And it may not be that any one particular one of them didn't have enough merit on its own, but it just made sense that we could have them all together, show off their work, and then still talk of kind of communicate and question between them. So that's certainly it. And the other thing that we've also talked a little bit about this year, though we don't specifically call it out in the proposal, but I certainly would say if it's something that you are interested in, that you can put it across in the languaging, that we want to kind of nurture some of this like content and experiences, sort of a wrap above, sort of before and after as well. So if there's something that you think, even if it's like a musical performance, you don't have a grid, right? That you think, well, if I only had a space to have that, then put in a proposal for that, and we can sort of see what we can do. Obviously we have spaces in the various, in the grid, and we can kind of, depending upon the needs for that, we can bring up things, whether that's a musical performance or something, art or theater focused, and also the idea of some of these workshop things, that could happen before or after. Think on those things. Sort of as we were talking about that, that Marcus is going to be doing a streaming workshop, and we've reached out to others to sort of maybe do some other content related things, and that even if you again need to do some grid space, that we could kind of put that, it would still end up on the same schedule. But I think workshops definitely, probably, since they're more involved, it would be a hard thing to run within the keynote regions, but like before and after, as sort of it's kind of people to dive in deeper to what Open Simulator can be used for. I think
I think it was when we were starting up organizing last year's conference, in fact, that we were looking at things, and Avacon gets keeps very good records of attendance and stuff like that. We always have a little private post-mortem, if that's the right word, going over who was interested in what and voted for what and whatever. And we did realize that despite the fact it's a conference and you want to hear speakers telling you about what they're doing, it was actually not so much the theater or something like that, or the NPCs or the bots particularly, but the sessions that demonstrated something, right, where they could see something happen. They were much more popular than the stand up against a PowerPoint show kind of presentation, because somehow I suppose the presentation became a performance. So don't worry that you're not an academic and can't give a 20-minute performance. If you could show something, that might just be half the magic. If not more.
We had a great one at the end last year too, about like weapon systems and
the weapon kayaker.
And kayaker magic, and he was up on stage actually demonstrating it, right? So that's an example of a very specific thing that him talking about the platform and how how it relegates those physics related physics in regards to the weapon systems and those specific things, and sort of showed it off. And I think partly to sort of talk about his expertise and what this stuff was, but then also I think, as we were talking about before, you're at an event where you have a cross section of developers and users of the community. Maybe somebody out there can sort of jump in and help you with maybe some of the walls that you're hitting with what you're doing, or
I'm no person for shoot 'em ups and violence and weapons and like that. And when I read about that session, I thought, oh God, I don't want to know. Bus. But the interesting thing was when in the dress rehearsal, I realized that although I had no interest in weapons per se, he was also at the same time he was demonstrating a laser pointer in World. He didn't advertise it as that, but the very scripting and the technique he was using could be used by a teacher with a laser pointer. Because instead of targeting something to shoot at, you can target something in the region.
Yeah, one where you were shooting bullets into the slideshow.
Yeah. Shooting bullets into the slideshow. Yeah, it was funny. Yeah, in a way, I couldn't take it seriously at all. But in fact, there was something. The serious undertone where was that, that involves scripts and code.
And physics, all the underlying.
That has a totally different use over and beyond weaponry.
Yep.
And so don't be put off by some of these things. I admit this. I was put off by somebody doing a workshop on weapons. I don't want to know about weapons, but because I had to be there to screen test them, I suddenly realised, hang on, there's more to this than the weapons themselves. It's the code that's running them all, and that has multiple uses. So I like that. Suddenly it just clicks that. Well, if you can do that, you can do something sensible too.
Yeah,
and I'd like to point out too that as far as like presentation-y stuff, I think the NPC panel was a wonderful example of that, because if you're put off by you've got your project and of course you want to showcase it, but don't be put off by the idea of being part of a panel, because I'll tell you what, that NPC panel, everybody got to show off their NPC creations, and we got to see huge dioramas of people talking to Keats and NPCs coming out and talking, about typhoid and the singing nuns, and it was they because we put them all together, they really enriched each other and made for a much more wonderful presentation in the end.
I'm going to take a liberty of making one stipulation here, and I hope Marcus and Joyce agree with me. There's an exception to the rule here. If you are making a proposal to do a presentation, it is not acceptable to send us an NPC and think you can do the whole thing on Skype.
That's fun.
I say that because Lear Lobo's NPC is always hanging around here for an emergency, but you get the idea. Well, maybe.
You do have to be. I think for engaging in the conference, if you are a presenter or a moderator, you have to be comfortable enough to be on a Skype call and your avatar up on stage. So.
Yeah, exactly.
But even that's not too bad. I think not to say that it still can kind of, I think, give a bit of nervousness beforehand anyway. But as we said,
it's an exception to the rule too. If I had an NPC of you available, Joyce, I'd put it in your seat right now so people would think you're still here. So it's an acceptable emergency strategy, but.
Yes,
and like I said before, with volunteers, we really do try our best to accommodate everybody, and not just volunteers, but presenters as well. They also get training, and we try to accommodate their needs and their schedules. For example, we had mentioned the presentation about people with disabilities. They had special things that they needed. They needed speech to text, and they needed to be able, for people on the video stream to be able to see a video and see the chat log. And of course, we can't accommodate every request, but we do make a really big effort to try to make your vision happen.
Okay. Right, well, I think it's about time we sort of called it a wrap. We're going over trodden ground here a little bit too. So I'm going to actually ask us all if there's anything else, but you know, we've covered Avacon, OSCC, and non-profit commons.
Yes.
So
Everybody knows far more about everything now on that role.
you may well have other things on your mind. So I'm actually going to go around everybody and just for closing thoughts. But before we do, I'm going to ask Marcus to shift us to one of the cameras where we've got the Avatar Fest again on screen.
James.
This is really sorry. Yes, James. Oh, now
it's interchangeable now.
What the two of you together are doing to me. Right. Yes. Sorry, James. My apologies. You'll see there we've got the sign for the Avatar Fest coming up. Sharing of the lights or sharing one light. Okay. It's not easily readable, I'm afraid. But a reminder that this time next week it will be happening, September 23rd, although it continues to October 30th. It's sort of a user creative. It's a prelude really to the more serious conference itself, and hopefully if James still has the camera in that position, no, that wasn't a very good idea, was it? It's going through everything at high speed. Right, that's the one I want. Come on, load. Right, well, oh, this is not fun. I should just click forward, shouldn't I? Right. That's the one I want. There we are. Right. So at this point, I will also remind you about Hypergrid Safari. There's the logo. Every Wednesday, we're back in the new season now. We'll be the third week of the new season this coming Wednesday. Meet at noon Pacific time at the region called HG Safari on Franco Grid. And look at the social feeds and anything in case, you know, if Franco Grid's down for some reason, which it rarely is, then it may be on OS Grid or Great Canadian Grid. But normally it meets there, and there'll be two exciting new destinations for you to see. And if you're watching my feeds in the morning on Wednesday, you might even find out in advance what the destinations are, because we're posting them a bit earlier these days. Right, okay, so having reminded you of those two things, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but from my point of view, I don't think there is. So maybe I'll start with you, James. I take it there was no active questions or anything in the chat today?
Nope, no activity there.
They're quiet. They're a quiet lot there. But any closing thoughts from you before I move to?
Well, I'm really thinking a lot about what Marcus said, and I really appreciate your thoughts, Marcus, about emphasizing the drama. And I hope I don't emphasize the drama so much with the developers. It's I'm so passionate about the platform that I so desperately want it to continue that maybe I do flame the fires of drama, but it's a fascinating thing to watch. The way that human beings come together, try and build something collaboratively, and I'd say by and large OpenSim is doing pretty good.
I don't think I love that expression, fire the flames of drama. I don't think we do that at all. I think in some cases, I think sometimes the drama is just waiting there to spark off as any little spark.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, yes, Marcus, any closing thoughts for you unrelated to what we've spoken about already, really? Yeah.
Well, just I guess volunteer, come to OSCC, and I'll just replug that I'm giving a presentation on streaming on Second Life at the nonprofit Commons region called Plug or something like that. Plush. Sorry, Plush on September 29th. So if you're interested, please come by.
So that's not this coming Friday, the Friday after, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Friday morning.
I love that. The Plug non-commons, was it? I love it. You want a name change?
That would not be an uncommon virtual world name. So No surprises.
I was one comic strip artist who worked for Marvel Comics back in the day.
You know what it is? I got confused with one of the core developers uses that as his IRC handle, and I just couldn't get past the PLU. I just
yeah, there was a comic artist back in the day. His work I really loved. It's called Mike Plug, and I could never believe it was his real surname. I mean, PLOOG. I think it was. Anyway, so Rhiannon, Joyce, whatever name.
Yeah, I know. I
it's even harder when you're invisible.
The invisible woman.
Yeah, we
yes,
better.
I know. I'm sorry.
We better just.
You can blame my Nvidia card for that.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, we'll stick with the conference screen while you're talking. But anything else?
Yeah.
Anything else you can?
I mean, certainly, you know, as I said, call for all those things to volunteer, to submit a social event, to submit a proposal, to sponsor. All that stuff is up at conference.opensimulator.org. You know, would love for you to kind of get involved in our merry band, right? You know, otherwise, you know, a lot of these other things are also posted on avacon.org, which is kind of the main site there. And, you know, we... And as you said, Nonprofit Commons is every week on the Friday, so you kind of come by that if you're in Second Life. You know, I mean, other than that, you know, thanks Mal for having me here today. I know you've tried to get me on before, and often our schedules don't align, so I'm happy.
Yeah, Sundays is just not your day normally, is it?
I know.
It's your long-awaited day off, it's a week, I should think. Okay, well, I think we'll call it a wrap. I'd like to thank all you folks who've been here, really, but I'll go around you in turn. So, firstly, I'll thank James out loud, and also thank him for operating all the cameras. Thank you, James.
No, absolutely, Mal. I enjoy it so much.
And I'll thank Marcus, who is not operating the camera, by the way, despite me putting my foot in it. But I'd thank Marcus Llewellyn, too. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Mel. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you to our main guest, Rhiannon Chatnoir, otherwise known as Joyce Bettencourt from Avacon, from NPC, but yeah. From everywhere. Thank you. Thank you.
From the virtual world somewhere. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mal.
Okay. So with that, we're out of here. I'm going to wish you all a very good morning, a very good afternoon, and a very good evening, but even a good tomorrow, depending on wherever and whenever you are. And we will return next week. See you then. Bye for now.